Wind clawed at the cliffside lodge as Caleb Rourke shoved the door open, boots slipping on the icy porch. The storm wasn't supposed to hit for another hour, but the sky had already dropped into a bruised twilight. Echo, his Malinois, froze. The moment they stepped inside Ear's rigid body angled toward the far hallway. Caleb heard nothing, but Echo's low growl vibrated through the floorboards. Then a faint click echoed behind the stone wall, too precise to be settling wood. The storm howled harder as if urging him back outside. Caleb steadied his breathing. Something or someone was in the lodge with them. Caleb killed his flashlight to listen. The wind outside thrashed against the shutters, but inside the lodge the silence settled into something heavier, too controlled, too expectant. Echo crept forward, nails whispering over the old pine boards. She paused at the junction where the stone hallway narrowed nose, lifted breathing sharp and fast. Caleb followed her gaze to a section of wall that didn't quite match the rest newer mortar seams, a faint line of dust disturbed at the base. Another sound so soft he almost doubted it slid through the dark. A muted thud like a door easing shut behind thick masonry. Caleb closed his hand over Echo's collar. Easy, he murmured, though the word felt thin. She didn't look back at him. Her entire body leaned toward that wall, tense as a coiled wire. A sudden lull in the storm made the quiet even sharper. Echo's growl deepened. Caleb exhaled slowly. He'd come here for peace, for space no one else wanted. But the lodge felt less abandoned with every breath he took. Whatever waited behind that wall, it hadn't left when he arrived. And Echo seemed certain it was still listening. Caleb Rourke waited until Echo's growl faded before he reached for the breaker panel beside the kitchen entryway. The old metal box rattled when he flipped it open, brittle from years of mountain winters. He clicked on a single switch, not the main feed, just enough to test the lines. A dim bulb above the sink flickered to life, casting pale light across chipped tile and dust-silvered counters. The illumination didn't make the lodge feel safer. If anything, the half-light carved deeper shadows around the doorway. Echo kept watching. She stood motionless now, weight shifted forward, chest rising in sharp breaths. Every few seconds she flicked a glance back at him, urging him without sound. But the storm outside had begun slamming ice pellets against the shutters, and Caleb refused to chase trouble blind on his first night here, not with a winter squall barreling down the ridge. Later, he told her gently. She didn't move. He placed a hand on her flank, guiding her back a step. Her muscles were taut, but compliant, and the moment he brushed the thick fur at her neck, the tension in his own body dropped by a thread. Echo was alert, not panicked. That distinction mattered. Panic in a trained dog meant danger was already here. Alert meant the danger was listening, waiting, or remembering its way out. Caleb locked the door behind them, slid the deadbolt, then wedged a heavy sideboard against it. Not because he believed it would stop someone determined, but because it forced a second of sound if the door opened enough to wake him. The lodge held its breath. He scanned the kitchen again. The room was larger than the exterior suggested, the way old mountain cabins often hid extra space carved into the rock. Long counters stretched under the fogged windows, their laminate peeling in curled strips. A pot rack hung low enough to collide with someone taller than him. Another reminder, the lodge predated any modern building code. A single iron kettle sat abandoned on the stove, its lid rusting in place. He didn't touch anything, he didn't need to. Not yet. Echo followed as he moved through the adjoining living area. The fireplace took up nearly an entire wall stonework, so broad it looked more like the mouth of a cave than a hearth. Soot streaks flared upward from the last fire years ago, maybe decades. A crooked iron poker leaned in the corner, its handle bent as if someone had gripped it too hard. Caleb crouched near the hearth hand, hovering over the cold ash. Untouched. Whatever sound Echo had reacted to behind that hallway wall wasn't from here. He stood and let the silence reshape itself. Mountain homes always had creaks, settling beams, expanding floors, roof lines adjusting to temperature shifts. This silence felt deliberate, like someone had built insulation not to keep heat in, but to keep sound from escaping. "Not my problem tonight," he murmured. But Echo didn't buy it. She circled the couch frame, sniffing the torn upholstery, then returned to the hallway again. Her tail was stiff, not wagging. When she paused halfway there, she flicked her eyes toward him once decisive. A cue. There. That's the place. Caleb felt the reminder of why he'd adopted her, why she'd been recommended to him by the rehabilitation specialist, who'd watched him walk out of therapy after 3 sessions. Echo wasn't a replacement for the dog he'd lost overseas, not a ghost to fill the space, but she understood him. Or at least understood the quiet he carried inside. He let her investigate from a distance while he surveyed the rest of the lodge. He needed to know his perimeter before choosing a place to sleep. The great room opened into a long hallway lined with shuttered windows. Light from the storm occasionally flashed white across the glass when lightning pulsed above the ridge. The air tasted faintly metallic, old wiring or old fear. It was hard to tell the difference in places that hadn't been lived in a long time. He checked the back door. It latched, but the wood frame was warped from moisture. He reinforced it with a chair wedged under the handle. Echo drifted room to room beside him, inspecting corners, sniffing baseboards, pausing at thresholds, as if reading stories left behind by people who had once walked here. There weren't many stories. The place felt forgotten long before the county listed it. He located the stairway near the back of the lodge. Unlike the heavy door, Echo fixated on this staircase was straightforward, a narrow wooden structure leading up to the loft. The banister looked original, carved with small diamond patterns. Dirt filled some of the grooves. He ran his thumb across one and felt a notch. A deliberate mark, maybe accidental. Hard to say. He climbed halfway up Echo, waiting at the bottom. The loft was mostly empty, just a mattress frame leaning against a slanted wall and a window overlooking the valley. When lightning flashed again, the entire valley brightened, revealing snow-dusted pines, a winding river road, and the stretch of cliffs that made this lodge a lonely silhouette against the mountains. He exhaled. Loneliness was part of the bargain. It was why he chose this place. But the reason it was so cheap now bothered him more than he expected. 50 cents base purchase. He'd felt clever, almost guilty when the auctioneer's gavel dropped. Now he understood why no one else wanted it. Places didn't go for 50 cents without a reason. By the time he returned downstairs, the storm was full-throated wind funneling along the ridge with a pitch that made Echo flatten her ears. Caleb dragged his duffel to the living room and unrolled his sleeping pad near the fireplace. He wouldn't risk the upstairs until morning. He set Echo's blanket down beside him. She didn't lie on it. She stayed standing, watching the hallway. He heated a can of soup on his camp stove, eating mechanically. Echo didn't take her eyes off the wall. When he finished, he knelt beside her. "What are you hearing?" he whispered. She didn't answer, of course she didn't, but her body leaned subtly toward the wall, as she inhaled, searching for something he could not sense. He remembered moments like this from deployment. Dogs hearing a vibration deep under rubble before any human ear could detect it. Dogs picking up breath from a collapsed stairwell. Dogs sensing the moment between danger and catastrophe. He swallowed. "Later," he repeated. "We'll look later." Echo's gaze remained fixed. The morning broke slow and gray, the way winter mornings often did on the ridge, like the sun was deciding whether it wanted to bother with this part of the world. The storm had left behind a lusterless layer of frost on the porch railings and a thin fog that clung to the trees below. A calm after the storm, but not a peaceful one. Caleb stepped outside Echo at his heel, both of them blinking into the cold. The air smelled of wet stone and pine resin, sharp and clean. The valley below was hushed, the world muted. No traffic, no chainsaws, no distant engines from snowplows. Just the dipped quiet that came after severe weather. He walked the perimeter of the lodge, with Echo darting between him and the property line. Tracks in the frost led to the back corner of the building, boot prints, not from him. They'd been softened by the storm, but still visible. Someone had stood under the eaves recently. Echo's head lowered, nose brushing the outline of the prints. Then she looked back at Caleb. He crouched. The prints were older than last night, likely from the day before or early yesterday. Whoever had been here wasn't trying to hide that they were watching the property. But they also weren't trying to be seen. He followed the trail until it vanished down the hillside. A light dusting of snow covered the rest. "Someone passed through," he murmured. Echo gave one sharp, quiet huff. He didn't linger outside. The cold bit deeper than he expected, and he still had to test the plumbing and patch the warped back door. Inside, he lit the stove and warmed his hands near the flame before starting repairs. Hours passed in small, deliberate tasks, fixing a sagging cabinet, hinge removing old nails from the floorboards, bracing loose shutters. Echo alternated between resting near the fire and making rounds through the hallway. She paused often at the strange wall again. The lodge had a pulse. Or it had secrets. Possibly both. In the afternoon, Caleb sat at the small table by the window, sorting through papers he'd brought with him, discharge documents, medical letters, Echo's training file, and the purchase receipt for the lodge. The county's seal stared back at him, stamped over a line reading, "Abandoned asset auctioned as is." He ran a thumb along the edge of the envelope. As is didn't usually come with hidden doors. Echo laid her head on his knee, a soft reminder that she was there, always present, always steady. She rarely sought contact without reason. When she did, it meant she sensed something shifting inside him. "You think I made a mistake coming here?" he whispered. Echo blinked, slow and calm. When he closed his eyes, distant memories flickered like film frames, dust clouds rising behind armored vehicles, the metallic tang of blood in sand, a dog's quiet whine trapped under rubble beside him. He remembered counting breaths, hoping for rescue before the world collapsed again. He exhaled. "That was then," he said softly. "We're here now." Echo let out a single quiet whine, not fear, not worry. A nudge. "Stay present. Keep moving." He reached down, brushing his hand through her fur. "Yeah, I know." Evening rolled in early. On the ridge, days shortened quickly in winter darkness, arriving like a drawn curtain. Caleb stacked a few pieces of dry wood in the fireplace, coaxing a small flame to life. Echo settled nearby, finally resting her head on her paws, though her ears still tracked every sound. The fire warmed the room, softening edges, turning stone into something almost familiar. Caleb leaned back against the couch, listening to the crackle of wood and Echo's even breathing. This was why he'd come. A place with no neighbors, no noise, no demands. A place where he could rebuild without apology. But the tranquility never lasted, not for him. His gaze drifted toward the dark hallway. That wall still bothered him. Not just because Echo had reacted, but because the architecture was wrong. The lodge was built in the 1000, 940 seconds updated, in the 70 seconds, and forgotten in the 2000s. The records he'd found online said nothing about renovations involving hidden chambers. And that hum from last night, the sound that cut out the second he touched the heavy door, had been too smooth. Not like old wiring. More like a generator shutting off. He rubbed a hand over his face. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" he said toward Echo. Her tail thumped once. No, she wasn't. Later that night, when the fire burned low, Caleb stepped onto the porch to breathe in cold air. The stars were faint clouds, drifting lazily across the sky, but the valley glowed with reflected moonlight against snow. The world seemed emptied of everything except the mountains and the lodge perched on their rise. Echo followed him out, standing close enough that he felt her warmth through the chill. "You think this place is trouble?" he murmured. Echo didn't answer, of course, but she pressed her shoulder gently against his leg. Caleb stood still for a long time, listening, thinking, feeling the quiet settle into his bones. Then he turned back to the doorway. Behind them, the lodge waited, holding its secrets. And somewhere inside that wall waited too. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow he'd investigate. Not because Echo insisted, not because fear pushed him, but because something in him needed to know why the lodge felt like a place halfway between refuge and warning. He pulled the door shut, Echo slipping in beside him. The heavy wall in the hallway loomed in the corner of his vision. Whatever was behind it hadn't made a sound since last night, and that silence, calculated, patient, felt like a promise, or a threat. Either way, he would face it soon. Morning came with a brittle cold that settled into the bones of the lodge. Frost limned the window panes, turning the glass into a web of white cracks. Caleb woke before the sun the way he always had, slow inhale, slow exhale, his mind checking the perimeter before his eyes fully opened. Echo was already awake. She sat upright beside the sleeping pad body, tense ears angled toward the hallway. No growl, no bark, but stillness like this was its own alarm. Caleb pushed himself up, wincing as his left knee protested. "Show me," he whispered. Echo rose immediately. She padded down the short passage, each step silent on the warped boards, stopping in front of the same heavy, overbuilt door he'd noticed on his first walkthrough. The seam of the frame looked more pronounced in the early light, cleaner almost, as if dust had been disturbed overnight. He had intended to wait until daylight. Now daylight was here, and Echo was telling him the waiting was over. Caleb unlatched the safety strap on his multi-tool, took a slow breath, and laid a palm on the wood. It felt colder than the surrounding wall, almost damp. Echo pressed her nose to the crack where the door met the frame, inhaled sharply, then retreated half a step, an alert, not fear. Caleb knelt, tracing the baseboard. The screws were newer than everything else in the lodge. The hinge pins weren't painted over like the others. Someone had installed this door long after the original construction. His heart ticked faster, the memory of a different door in a different country, flickering in the corner of his mind. One that hid a stairwell filled with dust and bad air, the place he'd been pinned for hours beside the dying dog. He couldn't save. He blinked the memory away. This wasn't that, but the body didn't always know the difference. Echo nudged his shoulder, gently grounding him. "Yeah," he whispered. "I'm here." He stood, tested the knob. It clicked but didn't turn, locked from the inside. He scanned the frame again, looking for weak points. The upper seam had a faint bulge. He reached for his multi-tool, flipped out the thin pry bar, and worked it into the seam, applying careful pressure. The wood groaned but held. Caleb frowned. The door wasn't resisting like something old. It was resisting, like something meant to keep people out. He changed angles using his weight, and the frame gave a soft pop. Echo flinched but didn't back away. Instead, she stepped beside him, gaze fixed on the widening gap. A faint draft brushed his face. Cold, dry, still, not basement air. Something deeper. He shifted the tool again, and the door finally cracked open an inch. No smell of mold, no dust puff, just darkness so complete it swallowed the morning light. Echo stepped forward and nosed the gap, then looked up at him with a short, sharp breath. She was ready. Caleb pushed the door open. A narrow wooden landing lay on the other side, followed by a stair descending into a dim shaft carved directly into the stone. Someone had chiseled steps into the bedrock, each one bowed slightly from use. A thick cable ran along the left wall, stapled into stone electrical wiring newer than the steps. Caleb exhaled slowly. This wasn't meant for storage. Echo descended first, her paws careful on the stone. Caleb followed, one hand on the wall, afraid of what he didn't hear. No dripping water, no rodents, no hum of a generator. Just silence that felt engineered. The stair turned once, then widened into a room carved out of the cliff itself. It wasn't large, maybe 20 feet across, but every inch was organized. Metal shelves lined the walls. Waterproof crates stacked neatly, labels on each arch of 3. Finance, NHT, surveys, 14. Audio logs. Caleb's breath caught. This wasn't a random hoard. This was a vault. Echo swept the perimeter, nose low, then circled back to him, head high. She seemed calmer now, not relaxed, but certain. She had found what she'd sensed. Caleb moved to the nearest shelf, hand brushing dust off a file box. The label read Parcel Disputes, Year 1. He opened it. Inside were folders of property claims, many stamped closed, though dates suggested disputes should still be ongoing. Some had signatures identical across multiple pages, 2 identical. Forgery. He opened another crate. Inside were rolls of survey maps with boundary lines drawn and redrawn in unfamiliar patterns. Echo gave a short bark, sharp, demanding his attention. He turned. She was nosing a small folding table set against the back wall. On it sat a reel-to-reel tape recorder, old but preserved. Next to it, a single tape labeled in tidy block letters, Testimony, Rourke. His throat tightened. Rourke wasn't a common name here, and there was only one Rourke who'd ever had business in Northline County 30 years ago, his father. He reached out, but hesitated. His fingers trembled slightly. Echo pressed her head against his arm, steadying him. He picked up the tape. The label was faded but legible. No date, no notes, just the name and handwriting he didn't recognize. He swallowed hard. "Dad, what were you doing here?" Echo whined softly, a quiet sound she only made when he drifted too far into memory. He blinked and put the tape into his jacket pocket. He'd need a functioning player, and this recorder looked intact, but plugging anything in down here felt premature, too risky. He turned back to the shelves, scanning boxes for anything more personal. That's when he saw the envelope. Plain, yellowed, edges curled, tucked between 2 binders as if left in haste. His name wrote across the front, Caleb. The handwriting was unmistakable. He tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, creased and brittle. "Caleb, if you're reading this, the county never finished what they started. Don't let them bury this place. Not again." Dad. Caleb stared at the words until the room blurred. He had spent half his life trying to reconcile the silence around his father's death, the quiet way people avoided the subject, the paperwork that never matched the stories, the sense that his father had been fighting something invisible. Now the invisible was literal. The archive around him was proof. Whatever his father had fought, whatever he'd tried to expose, lived inside these walls. Echo pressed against his leg again. He knelt, resting a hand on her shoulders. "We're in something deep," he whispered. Echo didn't flinch. She only looked at him with steady amber eyes, as if she'd known from the first night. If they left now, no one would blame them. He could go back to the highway, find a different mountain, pretend the lodge had never existed, pretend this room wasn't filled with evidence of a decades-long scheme. But Echo had led him here for a reason. He closed his eyes. He could walk away, start fresh, stay safe. Echo nudged him sharply in the chest. Not an accident, a push, as if telling him the choice mattered. He stood. "Okay," he breathed. "We're not walking away." Echo's posture eased, not relaxed, but affirmed. He pulled his phone from his pocket and snapped photos of the shelves, the files, the tape, the note. everything he could document quickly. Then he paused. A faint sound drifted from above. A soft creak on floorboards, light, controlled. A footstep. Echo stiffened ears stabbing upright. Caleb clicked off the phone light. He scanned for another exit, none. The only way out was back up the narrow stairs. Footsteps again. Closer. Someone else was in the lodge. Someone who knew this room existed. Caleb's pulse slowed, not fear, but the readiness he hadn't felt since his last deployment. He moved to the base of the stairs, positioning his body between Echo and the ascent. The dim air tasted different suddenly, like tension distilled. Echo lowered herself into a crouch, silent and ready. Another creak. Then stillness. Caleb inhaled, steadying himself. The choice was already made. He was going up those stairs. And whoever waited on the other side of the door would decide what happened next. The lodge was no longer a refuge. It had become a battleground. Caleb climbed the narrow stairs, with Echo pressed close behind him, her steady warmth grounding the quickening pulse beneath his ribs. The faint creaks he had heard moments before had vanished, swallowed by the kind of quiet no building made naturally. Someone had moved and then chosen to stand perfectly still. He paused at the top step, listening. Wind brushed against the northern shutters, but the sound inside the lodge was clean, controlled, waiting. Echo's breath warmed the back of his leg. Then she nudged his calf, urging him forward. Caleb eased the hidden door shut behind them. He didn't close it fully, just enough that the seam looked undisturbed. If someone was upstairs, they couldn't know he'd been below unless they'd watched him enter. He moved through the hallway with deliberate precision, avoiding loose boards. Echo had already taught him to step around. When he reached the main living room, he crouched low behind the old sofa frame. Echo slid down beside him, chest to the floor, ears rotating like twin sensors. Nothing moved, but the atmosphere had shifted. The lodge felt less like a forgotten home and more like a cavern filled with a breath held too long. Caleb's gaze swept from window to entryway to the loft ladder. The prints he'd seen outside earlier suggested someone had been watching the property. It wasn't impossible they'd slipped in the moment he went downstairs. A soft tap echoed overhead, timed with the lull of the wind, subtle enough to dismiss as settling beams. But Echo's head snapped upward. Caleb's stomach tightened. He crept toward the loft ladder. Echo followed her steps, liquid-controlled. He climbed slowly, testing each rung. Halfway up, he paused and listened. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then an almost imperceptible rustle of fabric. He reached the top. The loft appeared unchanged. Empty frame, dust-coated floor, frost-edged window. But when he moved closer, Echo surged past him and went straight to the window's edge. She sniffed aggressively at the sill, then backed away with a soft whine. A footprint, faint but present, marred the dust. Someone had stood here recently, watching the direction Caleb had come from, watching the lodge's approach. He checked the latch. Closed, intact. No sign of forced entry, but the cold metal felt wrong, warmer than the surrounding air. Someone had touched it minutes earlier. He stepped back. Whoever had been inside was gone, moved fast, silent. A memory flashed, the kind he tried never to encourage. A collapsed building, dust choking the air. A body beside him, canine breath ragged, the last whine slicing through the howl of the distant firefight. He'd been pinned under a broken beam, unable to free the dog. Its heartbeat had slowed against his arm. Echo nudged him, snapping him back to the present. He exhaled through his nose. "Not today," he whispered. He made a slow sweep of the lodge. No broken locks. No disturbed furniture. No scent strong enough for him to detect. Whoever it was had entered without damage, left without noise. A key or familiarity. This wasn't a random trespasser. Whoever had stood in the loft knew the lodge intimately. When he returned to the living room, Echo was stationed by the hallway again, staring at the hidden door. A tremor of unease pressed through him. Someone else knew about the archive, and they had come to see whether he knew too. Caleb spent the afternoon copying every document he dared remove from the vault and hiding them in waterproof bags under the floorboards near the main fireplace. He didn't dare carry evidence on him, not until he understood who in the county he could trust. Echo lay beside him, occasionally lifting her head when the wind changed tone. He replayed his father's note in his mind. "If you're reading this, the county never finished what they started. Don't let them bury this place. Not again. Not again." What had his father seen here? What had he tried to expose? He found himself sitting on the floor, staring at the dying fire, Echo's head on his thigh. The flickering orange light cast long shadows across the walls. The heavy, hidden door seemed darker than the rest, absorbing color. A thought stirred one. He resisted until it took shape. This place hadn't just been abandoned, it had been sealed. And the person who'd stood in the loft probably wasn't finished checking on it. Before dusk, Caleb walked the property again. Echo moved like a living compass, her body marking direction and distance. She paused at the tree line, her nose lifted toward the forest. He followed her line of sight. A scrap of cloth fluttered on a branch dark green like a piece torn from a jacket. Not recent. Wind-frayed edges suggested it had been there for days, maybe weeks. But it marked a vantage point overlooking the lodge. He took it down. Echo sniffed the fabric, then looked toward the lodge driveway with sudden tension. Caleb understood the message. Someone had watched this place long before he arrived. Someone who wanted to know who controlled the archive. And now they knew he'd found it. The sun dipped beyond the ridge, swallowing the valley in cold amber. Caleb stood beside Echo, the cloth in his hand, the mountains breathing frost into the dusk. A truth settled in. The lodge was no longer simply a project. It was a responsibility. One he hadn't asked for, but one he couldn't pretend he didn't see. That night, before securing the lodge, Caleb made his first real choice, not reactive, not fearful. He gathered candles, placed them in the hallway leading to the hidden door, and sat against the wall with Echo curled against his side. A line of soft flame flickered along the floorboards, illuminating each shadow. If someone came back tonight, if they touched that door, if they moved through the hall, he would know. Echo would know first. The air tasted sharper. The temperature had dropped. The world outside felt poised. Caleb rested a hand on Echo's back, her fur warm beneath his palm. "We stay alert," he whispered. Echo breathed in long and quiet, then relaxed only enough to lower her head to her paws. Caleb didn't sleep. Not fully. He waited for the sound of a footstep, a breath, a hand on wood. It didn't come. But the decision to watch instead of run, to stand his ground in the quiet, marked the real beginning. He wasn't walking away. He wasn't pretending this wasn't his fight. Tomorrow he would confront someone who knew his father, someone who had answers about the lodge, someone who had avoided him for years. He would visit Eli Vargas, and he would ask why his father died trying to expose something in these mountains. Echo lifted her head as if she'd heard the decision form. Caleb met her eyes. "We move at first light." The sky at dawn was a pale wash of pewter as Caleb and Echo drove toward the far valley, where Eli Vargas kept his modest cabin near the reservoir. The truck's heater struggled against the morning frost, and Echo sat upright in the passenger seat, nose pressed to the glass, watching the drifting fog lift like smoke. Caleb had known Eli since he was a teenager, his father's old friend, though not close enough to attend the funeral. Eli had retired from the forestry service years ago and vanished into a quiet life. The kind of man who saw everything even when he pretended not to. Echo's tail thumped once as they pulled into the long gravel drive. The cabin was simple weathered boards, metal roof, stacked wood beneath the porch. Smoke from the chimney curled unevenly, as though the fire hadn't been built with care this morning. Eli stepped onto the porch as Caleb climbed out. His hair had gone silver since last they met, his eyes still sharp under the brim of his hat. He held a mug steam rising. "You picked a cold day to drop in," Eli said. His tone wasn't unfriendly. But it wasn't warm either. Echo approached, cautiously sniffing the air. Eli watched her. "She's got instincts," he said. "Just like your old man's dog." Caleb didn't flinch, but his grip on the truck door tightened. "Can we talk?" he asked. Eli nodded and motioned him inside. The cabin smelled of pine resin and strong coffee. Maps of the valley hung on the walls, some hand-drawn, others printed decades ago. Eli moved slowly to the wood stove, adding a log. Crackling warmth filled the room. Echo circled once before settling near Caleb's chair, though she didn't relax fully. Her ears rotated, tracking every sound. Eli lowered himself onto a short stool. "You're not here for small talk. So tell me." Caleb reached into his jacket and placed a thin envelope on the table. Eli stared at it a moment, then sighed. "I hoped you'd never find that place. You knew about the lodge. I knew enough." Eli rubbed his eyes. "Your father, he kept his distance from me the last year he worked for the county, said it was safer that way. Safer." The word landed heavily. Caleb opened the envelope and withdrew a photocopy of one of the forged survey maps. The boundary lines had been altered subtly, just enough to shift public land into private holdings. Eli leaned in. "I remember these. He showed me a set once. Told me someone was erasing the valley piece by piece," Lang Caleb said quietly. Eli didn't answer, but the silence confirmed it. "He was using the Heroes Trust as a front," Caleb continued. "Pulling money meant for veterans, dogs, rehab programs." Eli's jaw tightened. "Your father thought the trust was dirty long before any of us did." He kept digging until the county cut his access. After that, he kept working alone. Caleb waited. Eli closed his eyes. The accident wasn't an accident. He didn't slide off the road. His truck was found 200 yards from where he'd called me the night before. Said he had evidence to hand off. Never made it. Caleb's breath stilled. Echo stepped closer, nudging his leg, sensing the shift in him. Eli's voice lowered. I should have spoken up then. Should have fought. But I had a wife and a newborn. And Lang had already made examples of 2 others. The old ranger looked away, shame etched into the lines of his face. I'm sorry, Caleb, he whispered. Caleb absorbed the words silently. He wasn't angry. He wasn't surprised. The truth had lived in the margins of his memory for years. Hearing it now felt like confirmation of a shadow he had always suspected. Eli wiped his palms on his jeans. And if you found the archive, Lang's going to know. He keeps eyes on that ridge. Always has. Caleb thought of the footprint in the loft. The warmed latch. Someone was in the lodge yesterday, he said softly. Eli's gaze snapped up. Then you need to move fast. That place isn't just evidence, it's leverage. The moment Lang thinks you're a threat, he'll shut every door you try to open. Echo growled softly. Not loud, just a warning. Eli swallowed hard. If you want help, there might be someone outside the county. A journalist, used to cover environmental fraud cases, Veterans Affairs. Her name's Mara Lynn. She doesn't scare easy. Caleb nodded. I'll find her. Eli hesitated, then left the room. When he returned, he held a small metal box. He placed it in front of Caleb. Your father gave me this the week before he died, Eli said. Told me to keep it in case anything ever resurfaced. Caleb opened the box. Inside lay a single dog tag, worn edges, dulled chain broken. Not a soldier's tag. A service dog's tag. The stamping was almost erased, but the word remained Ranger, his father's canine partner. The breath left Caleb's lungs. Echo leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes soft, as if she felt the shift inside him more clearly than he did. Eli said nothing. There was nothing left to say. On the drive back to the lodge, snow began to fall thin at first, then thicker as they gained elevation. Echo sat closer than usual, watching the road and occasionally glancing at Caleb with quiet insistence, as if telling him she understood why he was silent. The weight of his father's truth sat heavy but not crushing, more like a weight that forced stability, anchoring him rather than pinning him. At the ridge turnoff, the truck slid slightly on the ice. Echo braced paws, steadying against the floor. Caleb slowed. Snowflakes danced across the windshield, illuminated by the headlights. By the time he reached the lodge, the world was muted under a new blanket of white. And something else waited. A folded slip of paper wedged under the door. Echo's stiffened nose pressed to the crack. Caleb pulled the note free. 4 words in neat block letters, leave while you can. Echo growled a deep warning rumble. Caleb's jaw set. Not fear. Resolve. He pocketed the note. They weren't leaving. Not now. Tomorrow he would find Mara Lynn. Tonight he would fortify the lodge. And Echo would not sleep until he did. Mara Lynn answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was clipped alert, someone who'd learned to listen before speaking. Caleb introduced himself, mentioned Eli Vargas, and said only that he had information about a long-buried land case tied to veteran funds. Where are you? She asked. Northline County. A beat of silence. That's Lang's territory. Caleb didn't confirm. He didn't have to. Mara exhaled softly. All right. Meet me at Pine Hollow Diner on Route 7. Daytime, not tonight. Caleb agreed. He hung up. Echo nudged him once, then paced toward the windows, scanning for movement. The night outside was dark as ink. Wind whistled through the pines, shaking snow loose in glimmering sheets. Caleb checked the perimeter again, doors, windows, shutters. Echo followed, moving like a shadow tail, low but steady. When they returned to the living room, the fireplace embers glowed faintly. Caleb sat on the couch frame, elbows on his knees. Echo rested her chin on his thigh. He closed his eyes. Flashback. Sandstorm-level intrusive. The collapsed building overseas. Dust everywhere. The sound of metal tearing. The dog pinned beside him, eyes wide, chest heaving. Caleb holding the dog's blood-slicked fur, whispering a promise he couldn't keep. He opened his eyes sharply. Echo lifted her head, sensing the shift, and pressed her forehead against his chest, her version of anchoring him. He breathed. Slow, controlled, present. The moment passed. He brushed her fur gently. We're okay, he whispered. Echo's tail tapped once. The next morning they drove to Pine Hollow. It was the kind of roadside diner that survived because truckers liked the coffee strong and the eggs cheap. A few locals sat in booths, heads down, forks scraping against plates. The bell above the door chimed as Caleb entered with Echo at his heel. Mara Lynn sat in a corner booth facing the entrance. Sharp eyes, dark hair pulled into a low knot, a jacket too thin for winter weather but layered with quiet confidence. When Caleb approached, she scanned Echo quickly, then him. "You're Rourke." He nodded. She slid an untouched mug toward him. "Talk." Caleb produced a single photocopy from the archive, nothing incriminating alone, but enough to show he wasn't bluffing. Mara studied the map, her brow furrowing. "This boundary isn't just wrong," she said. "It's intentionally shifted. And this ordnance code, Northline used it 15 years ago. They stopped only because the state flagged inconsistencies." Caleb waited. She set the page down. "If you have a full set of these, you have something dangerous and valuable." Her eyes narrowed. "But you said veteran funds," Caleb nodded once. Echo's tail flicked, sensing tension. Mara leaned in. "Lang sits on the board of the Heroes Trust. Lots of money passes through, and no one tracks where it lands. He used it to skim rehab support," Caleb said quietly. "For veterans, for dogs." Mara sat back slowly as if recalibrating. "That's bigger than property disputes." "I know." She studied him for a long moment. "If what you're saying is true, I can't just publish it. I need corroboration, documents, testimony, patterns across counties." He held her gaze. "I have all of that. And Lang knows. He left a note on my door." Mara cursed under her breath. Not a word echoed in the diner, but enough to show she understood the stakes. She tapped her fingers against the table. "I'll help. But if Lang thinks you're a threat, he'll come at you sideways. Utility, sabotage, bank pressure, character smears, injuries that won't look like accidents." Caleb's jaw tightened. Mara nodded toward Echo. "Good thing you're not alone." Echo lifted her head, meeting Mara's gaze calmly. A waiter walked past. Echo didn't flinch. Mara watched her closely. "She's trained," Mara said. "Not just obedient. She watches everything." Caleb nodded. "She saved my life more than once." Mara folded the map copy and slid it into her notebook. "All right, give me 48 hours. I'll make calls, collect data. Then I'll come to the lodge." Caleb hesitated. "You're sure?" "No," she said plainly. "But I'm going to do it anyway." Echo gave a single approving huff. Mara blinked, surprised. "She speaks for you. She speaks when it matters," Caleb said. Mara smiled faintly. "Good. Because we're about to walk into something very, very heavy." Driving back up the ridge, Caleb felt the subtle shift in Echo's posture. She was alert, ears angled toward the rear window. He checked the mirror. A dark SUV followed at a distance. No lights keeping back far enough to claim coincidence. Echo's tail lowered. At the next bend, the SUV slowed, then turned off onto a side trail, testing him, measuring him, reminding him that he was already marked. Caleb exhaled. "It begins." Echo pressed her nose to the glass. When they reached the lodge, the front door was ajar. Echo launched forward, barking sharply, one deep alarm. Caleb unslung the pry bar he kept near the doorframe. They entered together, Echo sweeping the left, Caleb moving right. The living room was altered, not ransacked, not chaotic, just touched. A single candle sat in the center of the floor, burned halfway. A piece of rope lay beside it, and a boot print fresh wet marked the floorboards. Echo sniffed the print, then backed away, fur raised. Caleb's heart slowed with controlled precision. This was a message, not to scare him, to warn him that someone could enter whenever they wanted. He knelt beside Echo. "We secure the lodge," he said softly. Echo leaned in, steady. They barricaded windows, reinforced the back door with spare timber, and Caleb set metal cans with stones along the hallway outside the hidden door primitive alarms. By nightfall, the lodge felt less like a home and more like a defensive position. And yet Caleb didn't feel trapped. He felt ready, because now he had a heading, an ally, and proof worth protecting. He sat beside the fire. Echo curled against him, warm and solid. Tomorrow, Mara would dig deeper. Tomorrow, the picture would sharpen. But tonight, a crack echoed from outside. Echo's head snapped up, tail rigid, body coiled. Caleb rose. Snow drifted past the window. Something moved at the tree line too quick to identify, too quiet to track. Echo growled, low and certain. Caleb whispered, "Let's see how far they're willing to go." Mara returned sooner than expected. The morning was brittle cold, the kind that froze the moisture in the air into delicate crystals. Echo announced her arrival before the truck crested the ridge head up, tail alert, a low rumble vibrating through her chest. Caleb stepped onto the porch as Mara parked beside the woodpile. She climbed out, fast laptop bags slung over her shoulder breadth, visible in quick bursts. "I have news," she said without preamble, "and none of it is small." They entered the lodge. Echo settled near the hearth but didn't lie down watchful. Mara set her laptop on the table, fingers trembling slightly from cold or nerves. I reached 2 contacts in the capital. Pulled public filings. Cross-referenced Heroes Trust grants. "Caleb?" She turned the screen toward him. "Lang has siphoned funds for over a decade. Millions. Enough to build entire developments." Caleb absorbed the screen of numbers, charts, dotted lines. It wasn't the scale that tightened his chest, though. That alone was staggering. It was the pattern. Every year, funds marked for veteran rehabilitation and service dog medical support had been redirected into community revitalization projects. And every project was managed by a Lang-controlled company. Echo lifted her head at Caleb's sudden inhale, sensing the shift. Mara continued, "It gets worse. Your father filed a complaint the year before he died. The record isn't public, but my contact remembers it. He described it as credible, concerning, and then suddenly gone from the system." Caleb felt the ground tilt slightly. His father hadn't imagined the conspiracy. He had confronted it, alone, and paid the price. Mara pulled up another file, parcel maps, property transfers. Lang manipulated boundary surveys across the valley, took land from elderly owners, pressured families to sign over claims. He buried disputes under fake safety codes. Caleb remembered the footprint in his loft, the candle on his floor, the note on his door. "He's watching," Caleb murmured. "Always watching." Mara nodded. "And he's scared of the archive. That tells me the lodge is the last thing he hasn't scrubbed." Echo rose and pressed against Caleb's knee as if reinforcing the point. Mara leaned forward. "If we get everything digitized and securely backed up, we can take this to the state. But you need to know," the window shattered. Not fully, just a hairline impact at the corner, spiderwebbing the glass. Echo lunged toward it, barking so loudly the walls seemed to shake. Mara froze. Caleb pulled her down behind the table. A second impact. A metallic crack, like a warning shot. Caleb crawled to the window, staying low. He peeked. A dark truck idled at the bend in the ridge road. A man stood outside it, hands in pockets, watching. No attempt to hide. No attempt to shoot again. Just a message. This is as close as we need to get. The man climbed back into the truck. The vehicle reversed down the hill, slow and deliberate. Mara exhaled shakily. "He knows I'm here. He knows everything." Caleb's voice was steady. Too steady. Echo returned to his side, nudging the back of his hand, sensing the simmer of anger beneath his calm. Mara pressed her palm to her forehead. "We're out of time. He's escalating." Caleb nodded. "Then we escalate too." They spent the next hours building digital copies of the archive. Mara photographed documents while Caleb scanned maps and Echo circled the lodge, checking windows, pausing at unfamiliar scents. By evening, they had dozens of gigabytes stored on encrypted drives and cloud folders under anonymous tags. Mara closed her laptop. "We have enough to get state investigators involved, but I need to go in person, and soon." Caleb nodded once. "Tomorrow, tomorrow." Echo growled softly, gaze fixed on the hallway toward the hidden door. Caleb stood. "What is it, girl?" Echo didn't bark. She moved to the door nose at the seam, then back to him, urging. Something had changed inside the vault. Caleb grabbed a lantern. Mara followed, heart pounding audibly. Echo led them. He pushed the hidden door open and descended. At the base of the stairs, he froze. A single box had been pulled from the shelf. Not enough to suggest a break-in, but enough to say someone had been here. Echo sniffed around the box, then the steps, her posture rigid. Mara's breath hitched. "He has a key. He has access." Caleb corrected softly. "There's a difference." He scanned the vault. No evidence missing. No documents tampered with. Just the box shifted several inches, like a fingerprint left in plain sight. "Lang knows exactly what's down here," Caleb murmured. "He's showing us he can reach it whenever he wants." Echo pressed against his leg tail, still eyes sharp. Mara whispered, "Then why hasn't he destroyed it already?" Caleb answered without looking away from the shelves. "Because he wants to control who sees the truth, not erase it." The thought chilled him more than the stone floor. In the vault's flickering lantern light, Caleb realized something vital. Lang wasn't afraid Caleb had the evidence. He was afraid of what Caleb might do with it. Mara closed the box carefully. "Tomorrow, I go to the capital. Tonight, we reinforce every point of entry. Caleb nodded. We won't sleep. Echo settled at the base of the stairs between them and the darkness, her silent promise to guard what they could not. Outside, wind pressed against the cliffside. The storm hadn't returned, but something heavier had taken its place. A feeling not of weather, but of approach. As they secured the lodge, Echo halted abruptly near the front door. She stared at the floorboards, then at the window, then at Caleb. It took him a moment to understand. A new footprint, snow melting. Smaller than the one in the loft. Fresh. Someone had come to the door minutes ago. Listened. Left. He swallowed hard. The lodge wasn't just being watched, it was being measured. And tomorrow, when Mara left with the evidence, Lang would make his next move. Caleb rested a hand on Echo's head. We hold our line tonight. Echo didn't blink, Mara whispered. And then Caleb faced the valley the night, swallowing the world beyond. Then he said, voice steady, we take the fight to him. Echo exhaled a low, certain sound, the kind she made when she recognized the moment a mission truly began. Caleb didn't sleep. Neither did Echo. Mara dozed upright in the armchair for 20 minutes at a time, but each time Echo's head lifted or the wind pressed hard against the shutters, she jolted awake. The storm hadn't returned yet. The air held a pressure. Caleb recognized from deployment the electric stillness that precedes a coordinated strike. At 4:12 a.m., Echo rose abruptly. No growl. No warning bark. Just silent certainty. She moved to the window facing the road and stared motionless, tail stiff. Caleb crossed the room and peered through the frost-rimmed glass. Headlights. 2 sets. Moving slowly, deliberately, without hurry. Mara's breath caught behind him. Is that yes? Caleb's voice stayed level. It's Lang. Echo brushed against his knee, steadying him, urging readiness. Caleb stepped back from the window. Mara, grab your drives, your laptop, and your coat. You're leaving before he gets out of the truck. What? No, Caleb, I can't outrun. You're not outrunning anyone. Caleb slung his jacket over his arm. You're going through the back ravine. Echo knows the trail. She'll take you halfway. Mara blinked. You're sending the one dog who can protect you. She's not a shield, Caleb said softly. She's a guide. Echo pressed her shoulder against Mara's leg as if confirming the assignment. From the front window, engine doors opened. Slow. Calculated. More than one person. Caleb turned to Mara. Listen to me. If Lang gets the evidence, all of this dies in the dark. You need to reach the capital. You need to put this in the hands of people he can't bury. Mara's throat bobbed. What about you, Caleb? Looked at the heavy hallway door, the hidden archive, the place where the truth lived. Someone has to hold the line. Echo moved between them, head lifted toward Caleb, asking, Are you sure? He crouched and pressed his forehead briefly to hers. Soft but fierce. Protect her, he whispered. Echo's tail brushed the floor once agreement. Mara swallowed. I'm coming back with help, Caleb. I swear. I know. He opened the back door. Cold knifed in. Echo stepped out, first scanning the tree line. Mara followed, clutching her laptop and the encrypted drives. Caleb waited until they disappeared into the darkness before he closed the door and dropped the bar across it. From the front yard came the crunch of boots on snow. Time had run out. 3 silhouettes approached through the faint moonlight. Lang's stance was unmistakable, tall, confident, wearing the kind of casual coat that suggested he never expected consequences. Caleb stepped onto the porch. Lang smiled like they were acquaintances meeting at a grocery store. Morning, Rourke. Early start. Caleb kept his expression flat. You're trespassing. Ah, Lang replied, hands in pockets. That's the thing about county land. Lines blur. You learn that when you've been here long enough. His 2 men fanned out, watching the windows, the door, the angles, professionals. Lang tilted his head. You've stirred quite the dust cloud these past few days. Visiting old friends, calling journalists, opening rooms in that lodge no one asked you to open. Caleb said nothing. Lang's smile thinned. Where's the woman? The one with the laptop. Gone. Lang shrugged. Pity. Would have liked to chat. Snow shifted on the roof. Caleb's heartbeat slowed, not fear, not adrenaline, but military calm. Lang's eyes moved to the lodge itself. There's something down there, isn't there? Something your father died trying to hide. Caleb didn't react. Lang stepped closer, voice lowering. He should have let it go. Men who dig too far into things they don't understand tend to collapse under the weight. The implication was clear. Caleb exhaled slowly. You're not getting inside. Lang's pleasant expression finally cracked. That he said softly is where you're wrong. He nodded once. The 2 men advanced. Caleb moved instantly, retreating into the lodge and slamming the door shut. The first hit from outside shook the hinges. He shoved the sideboard against it and locked the inner bolt. Second hit, harder. He ran to the back hall and kicked the metal cans into place near the hidden door, makeshift alarms ready. Then he grabbed the large pry bar from the fireplace wall. A third hit crashed through the entryway wood. Snow and cold lunged into the lodge. Caleb backed into the hallway, controlling the choke point. If they wanted the archive, they'd have to go through him in a narrow space, one at a time. Footsteps on shattered boards. A man entered broad-shouldered, armed with a short baton. Caleb swung first, deflecting the strike. The hallway forced them into close combat blows, glancing off walls. The second intruder tried to flank through the living room. Caleb pivoted using the pry bar to block the angle. A punch landed against his ribs hard, but he absorbed it and drove forward, pushing the man into the wall. They crashed into a bookshelf, sending brittle paper and broken frames across the floor. A metal can clattered in the hallway. Someone was near the archive door. Caleb's chest tightened. They knew exactly where to go. He fought through the first man, forcing him backward, then turned toward the hall and froze. Lang stood at the end of it, holding the tape recorder from the vault. Holding the testimony labeled Rourke. Lang clicked his tongue. "You really should lock your heritage more carefully." Caleb stepped forward. Lang raised a hand. One more step and this goes out the window and into the ravine. And trust me, the valley doesn't give back what it takes. The other two men bruised, but standing moved behind Lang, blocking escape. Caleb breathed once. Twice. He wasn't winning this by force. Lang studied him. "You're going to show me the rest. Every box, every map, every folder, or..." He tapped the recorder. "Your father's last words go wherever I decide." Caleb's heartbeat steadied, not with resignation, but with strategy. He needed a distraction. He needed Echo. But Echo was gone with Mara. He was alone. Lang smiled. "Let's go downstairs." Caleb stepped backward toward the archive door, pretending surrender. His hand brushed the doorframe. Then he heard it. A sound faint as breath. From outside the broken window, a familiar padded step. Fast, precise, Echo, back already. No dog would have left her handler longer than necessary. Caleb's chest loosened with a single tight exhale. Time to shift the balance. Caleb opened the archive door and took the first step down. Lang followed close behind, posture self-assured, recorder in hand. The two men flanked him. Caleb pretended to descend, waited, listened. Then glass shattered behind them. Echo flew through the broken window like a streak of muscle and instinct. She launched at the man nearest the hallway, hitting him square in the shoulder. He crashed against the wall with a choked cry. Lang spun. What Caleb surged upward, slamming his shoulder into Lang's chest and driving him into the wall. The recorder slipped from Lang's hand. Caleb caught it, turned, and hurled it down the hallway. One of Lang's men darted after it. Echo intercepted, standing over the fallen device, snarling with a ferocity Caleb had never heard from her. Her body shielded the recorder, teeth bared, a low rumble vibrating through the floor. Lang recovered and reached for a concealed blade. Caleb blocked his wrist, forced it away from the hallway, and struck with the pry bar. The impact sent the blade clattering across the floorboards. The second intruder lunged. Echo pivoted, slammed into his legs, and sent him crashing backward into the dining table. Wood splintered. Caleb grabbed Lang's coat, twisting him toward the front door. They struggled, boots sliding on broken glass. Lang hissed, "You're throwing away your father's fight. I'm finishing it." Caleb shoved him toward the porch. Lang stumbled out onto the snow. Echo barreled after him, stopping inches from his throat, growling, controlled a protector on the brink. Caleb stepped out slowly. "Call them off. Now." Lang's bravado flickered. "You have nothing without the rest of the archive." Mara's voice cut through the cold air. "Wrong." She emerged from the tree-lined breath, fast cheeks flushed. She held a phone in one hand, a badge in the other. "State investigators. Already on the line." Lang froze. Mara glared at him. "Your trucks followed me halfway down the mountain. You shouldn't have tried to block a state-certified journalist." Echo growled again. Lang swallowed. His men, seeing the shift, slowly raised their hands. Caleb exhaled. A long, steady breath. The fight was over, or at least this part of it. Hours later, the lodge was humming with activity. State agents cataloging crates, photographing altered maps, logging forged surveys into evidence bags. Sunrise painted the ridge gold, casting long shadows across the snow. Lang and his men sat cuffed near the road, monitored by two officers. Mara leaned against the porch, railing arms crossed. "It's over, Caleb. Almost, he said. Echo sat beside him, finally relaxed. Her body leaned against his leg, steady and warm. Mara exhaled. Your father, he tried to do what you just did. He'd be proud. Caleb didn't speak. He looked toward the valley where the first rays of sun melted frost from the pines. He thought of his father's handwriting. Don't let them bury this place. Not again. They hadn't. Echo nudged his hand, sensing the quiet ache beneath the victory. Caleb crouched and rested his forehead against hers for a moment, an old gesture but grounding. You brought her back to me, he whispered. When I was losing my grip, when I almost walked away. Echo's tail swept gently across the porch. Mara approached softer now. What will you do with the lodge? Caleb looked toward the heavy door in the hallway. The vault, the truth, the place where his father's fight still lived. I'll restore it, he said. Not as a bunker, as a record. A place people can come to understand what happened and why silence is dangerous. Mara smiled faintly. Then you're not only finishing your father's work, you're rewriting the ending. He nodded once. The valley caught the morning light. Snow glittered like scattered glass. Echo breathed deeply beside him, calm, grounded, certain. Come on, girl, he murmured. Let's go home. Home. Not a battlefield, not a hiding place. A place chosen with purpose, not fear. Echo rose and followed him inside, her steps steady. For the first time, the lodge felt warm, alive, safe. And as the door closed behind them, Caleb felt the weight of the past lift, not gone, but carried differently. Not alone. Never alone. Ian.